Nobody in that stadium was prepared for what the third inning became. Not the 56,000 people sitting in the seats. Not the broadcast crew who had arrived expecting a divisional rivalry game and found themselves scrambling to describe something that had no clean precedent in recent baseball memory. Not the umpires, who are trained to anticipate conflict and manage it before it becomes something larger, and who on this particular evening found themselves several seconds behind a situation that escalated faster than any of them could have predicted. Not even the players. What began as a baseball game between two teams that genuinely dislike each other, not the performed rivalry of franchises that marketing departments have decided should be enemies, but the real, accumulated, deeply felt tension of two organizations competing for the same ground over multiple seasons, ended as something the league will be processing for weeks. A brawl. On the field. With security surrounding a player and escorting him out of the building while the crowd made a sound that was part fury and part disbelief and entirely unlike anything a regular season game in May is supposed to generate. And at the center of all of it, as he has been at the center of so many stories this season, though never one quite like this, was Shohei Ohtani. The third inning began normally enough. Ohtani had already batted in the first, working a full count before grounding out sharply to second, the kind of at-bat that looks like a failure in the box score but tells a different story to anyone watching the pitch sequencing. He had been tracking the Padres starter carefully. Gathering information. The way he always does in the early innings, building a picture that he will use later when the game tightens and the margins shrink and every piece of information becomes leverage. He took the mound for the bottom of the third with the Dodgers leading by 1. His pitch count was manageable. His stuff, by the readings being tracked in both dugouts, was as sharp as it had been all evening, the fastball sitting at its usual velocity, the sweeper breaking with the kind of late, violent movement that makes hitters look foolish even when they know it is coming. The first batter went down on 4 pitches. Clean. Efficient. Exactly what you expect from him in the middle innings when he is locked in. And then something happened. Something that the cameras caught but struggled to explain. Something that the broadcast team noticed and immediately began talking around, unsure of how to characterize what they were seeing. Something that the Padres dugout, already watching Ohtani with the heightened attention of a team that has faced him multiple times this season, registered instantly and loudly. Ohtani stepped off the mound between pitches. Not unusual in itself, pitchers step off all the time to reset, to disrupt timing, to think. But the way he stepped off was different. He stood behind the rubber for a long moment, looking not at the catcher's signal, not at the runner, not at any of the targets a pitcher typically fixes his attention on between deliveries. He was looking at the Padres' dugout. Directly. Unblinkingly. With an expression that no one watching could quite read, not anger, not confusion, something that several people in the stadium later described as almost trance-like in its stillness. Like a man who had heard something that the rest of the world couldn't hear and was processing it in real time. The moment lasted perhaps 8 seconds. In a baseball game, 8 seconds is an eternity. Then he stepped back onto the rubber and threw a pitch. What happened next unfolded in 3 separate moments, each one escalating beyond the last. The first moment, the Padres' second batter of the inning, after working a 2-ball count, said something as he stepped out of the box between pitches. The words were directed at Ohtani. The distance between them, 60 feet, 6 inches, meant that most people in the stadium couldn't hear what was said. But the broadcast microphones, positioned to capture ambient sound near the mound, picked up enough that lip readers and audio analysts would spend the following 24 hours working to reconstruct the full sentence. What is certain is that Ohtani heard it. What is certain is that his response, a single step toward home plate, stopped immediately by his own evident self-control, was visible to everyone present. The home plate umpire issued a warning. To both benches. Standard procedure when tensions are visibly rising. The kind of warning that usually functions as a pressure valve, a signal that the officials are watching, that the next escalation will carry consequences. It didn't function as a pressure valve tonight. The second moment came 3 pitches later. The batter had been retired, a strikeout on a sweeper that caught the outside corner with surgical precision, the kind of pitch that, under normal circumstances, would have ended the inning cleanly and allowed the temperature in the stadium to drop back to something manageable. But as the batter turned to walk back to the dugout, he didn't walk back to the dugout. He stopped. He turned back toward the mound. And he said something else. This time, the distance between them had closed slightly. The cameras caught Ohtani's face clearly. And what they caught was the moment when something shifted, when the composure that has defined his public presence through every challenge, every controversy, every story this season, cracked. Not disappeared. Just cracked. Like a hairline fracture in something that had been under pressure for a long time. He said something back. Short. Direct. In Japanese, which meant that most people on the field couldn't understand the words, but nobody watching him could misunderstand the weight of what he was communicating. The third moment arrived before anyone could prevent it. A third Padres player, not the batter, not anyone currently involved in the exchange, stepped out of the dugout and onto the field. He had no business being on the field. He was not a coach. He was not responding to an injury. He crossed the line that separates the dugout from the playing surface with the specific, purposeful energy of someone who had made a decision and intended to follow through on it. And then three things happened simultaneously. Both benches cleared. The umpires converged. And security personnel, who had been monitoring the situation from the moment the first warning was issued, began moving onto the field with a speed that suggested they had anticipated this moment even if nobody else had. The brawl itself lasted less than 90 seconds. In the way of most baseball altercations, it was more chaos than combat, players grabbing players, coaches pulling coaches, a general human knot of bodies sorting itself out in the particular way that large groups of people sort themselves out when adrenaline is the primary organizing force. But at the center of that knot, something was different. The third Padres player, the one who had crossed the line from the dugout, had reached Ohtani. Not in any way that caused physical injury. But close enough, and with enough visible intent, that the security response that followed was immediate and absolute. He was surrounded within seconds. For security personnel, then 6, creating a perimeter that moved him steadily and without negotiation toward the exit. The crowd, which had been making noise continuously since the benches cleared, reached a new register when they understood what was happening, that this player was not being separated from a conflict, he was being removed from the building. The ejection came formally through the umpiring crew 30 seconds after security began their escort. By the time the formal announcement reached the press box, the player was already in the tunnel. Ohtani stood on the mound through all of it. He had not moved significantly during the chaos. He had not chased anyone. He had not escalated beyond that one moment, that single cracked instant, that the cameras had caught. He stood with his arms at his sides, his expression returned to its characteristic stillness, watching the scene around him with the particular quality of attention he brings to everything. Like he was gathering information. Like it was just another thing to understand. The MLB hearing was scheduled within 48 hours. Ohtani attended in person. He did not send a representative in his place. He did not issue a statement through the Dodgers communications office asking for the process to play out quietly. He walked into that hearing room the way he walks onto a baseball field, completely present, completely prepared, and completely unbothered by the scale of the moment. He was asked about the third inning behavior. Specifically about the 8 seconds between pitches when he stood off the mound and stared at the Padres dugout. The behavior that television analysts had been describing for 48 hours with words like bizarre, uncharacteristic, and unprecedented. Ohtani listened to the question. He asked for a moment before answering, not because he was uncertain about what to say, but because he wanted to say it precisely. Then he explained. What he had heard from the Padres dugout, beginning in the first inning and building through the second and into the third, was not routine competitive chatter. It was not the standard baseball noise that players learn to filter out before they reach the major leagues. It was specific. It was personal. And it was directed not just at him but at people connected to him, family members, by name, in a way that crossed a line that most players in this sport, regardless of how competitive the context, understand instinctively is not crossed. He had stepped off the mound and looked at the dugout because he was deciding something. In those 8 seconds, he was deciding how to respond, or more precisely, whether to respond at all, or whether to take the information he had just processed and convert it into the only response he was willing to give in a baseball game. A pitch. He told the hearing panel that he chose the pitch. That he stepped back onto the rubber and threw the ball because that was the right answer to what had been said to him. That everything after that, the exchange with the batter, the cleared benches, the security escort, had happened because other people made choices that he did not make and would not have made. He was asked if he felt the Padres' behavior had been coordinated. Whether what happened in the third inning felt like something planned rather than something that escalated spontaneously. Ohtani was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot tell you what was in their minds," he said. "What I can tell you is that it did not feel accidental. It felt like a decision. Multiple decisions, made by multiple people, aimed in one direction." He paused. "That direction was me. And I think the people in this room understand what I am telling you." The panel understood. The Padres issued a statement expressing regret for the escalation. The language was careful and largely empty, the kind of institutional apology that acknowledges a problem without taking responsibility for its specific shape. 3 players received suspensions of varying lengths. The player who crossed the dugout line received the longest, 7 games, which the Padres immediately announced they would appeal. The appeal, legal as it is, landed poorly. In a situation where the public record was clear, where multiple camera angles had documented exactly what happened, where Ohtani's account at the hearing had been consistent and detailed and entirely credible, contesting the consequences read not as due process but as an unwillingness to accept accountability. The Padres GM, who had already spent considerable political capital this week characterizing the Dodgers as practitioners of dirty tactics, had nothing to say about the appeal that improved his organization's position. Ohtani pitched through the 5th inning. After the benches cleared and the field was restored to something resembling order, after the warnings were formally issued and the lineup re-established and the broadcast team collected itself enough to resume something approaching normal commentary, Ohtani walked back to the mound and threw the next pitch. Like nothing had happened. Or more precisely, like everything had happened, and he had already processed it, and what remained was just baseball. Just the work. Just the 60 feet and 6 inches between his hand and the catcher's mitt and the specific mechanical problem of getting the ball from one place to the other in a way that the hitter could not solve. He faced 9 more batters after the brawl. He retired 8 of them. He left the game with the Dodgers still leading. The crowd, which had been chaotic and electric and at times genuinely frightening in its volume, gave him something different as he walked off the mound for the final time. Not the roar of a home run or a strikeout. Something quieter and more sustained, the sound of 56,000 people recognizing that they had just watched something they would not forget. Not the brawl. Not the ejection. Not the chaos of the third inning. The 8 seconds. The moment when the most composed player in baseball had stood at the center of a stadium full of noise and decided, deliberately, consciously, in full view of everyone, to choose the pitch. That was the moment. And everyone who was there knew it.